Today I'm talking about how to tell the difference between visual communication from spirit, otherwise known as clairvoyance, and our human imaginations. This is a follow-up video from what I posted a couple of weeks ago about what it is actually like to see spirit. After clarifying what spirit actually looks like, the next logical step is, how do we know we aren't imagining it? This video pertains to you. This video pertains to everyone because we all see spirit inside of our own minds. That is referred to as subjective clairvoyance, which was referred to in the last video about what it is like to see spirit. So if you personally want to take seeing your own loved ones in imagery or clairvoyantly a little bit further and know how to tell the difference between that and your own imagination a little bit further, keep watching. I am going to give you several ways to tell the difference between clairvoyance and your imagination. Watch through to the end of the video so that you don't miss any of those ways. For those of you who may not know me, my name is Mary. I'm an evidential psychic medium and animal communicator. Subscribe to my channel for all things spirit, mediumship, the other side, spirituality, and my absolute passion, which is helping everyone, everyday people, realize that they too can communicate with their loved ones on the other side, even without the use of a medium like me. Moving right into the subject at hand, how to tell the difference between clairvoyance and our human mind's imagination. First of all, we need to get fear of imagination out of the way. Imagination, when it comes to mediumship and the spirit realm, and the concept of spirit imagery and clairvoyance is labeled as this big, bad monster, but it's really not. So first of all, to get into the subject, you need to really lean into your imagination. It's not the big bad monster that we all think it is. If you shy away from your imagination as a whole, you will never receive spirit communication from your loved ones in heaven, and this is for two reasons. Shy away from your imagination, you will always be in your logical mind. And two, because spirit communication is very much like imagination. So if you're constantly pushing your imagination or what feels like imagination away, you will also, in short, be pushing spirit communication away. So you need to accept imagination and what feels like imagination into your mind, into your consciousness, in order to accept spirit communication into your consciousness. You also need to accept imagination and what imagination feels like in order to allow yourself out of your logical mind and into your non-logical mind in order to accept spirit communication. If you do not lean into imagination, you will never lean into spirit images, and you will never learn how to trust yourself or lean into trusting yourself, and therefore you will never receive images from your loved ones. So let's get the idea of imagination being a dirty word out of our wheelhouse. I actually teach this very same concept in my self-paced course, Limitless, a soul workshop for spirit awareness, which teaches you how to connect to your own loved ones through meditation. That's linked below if you would like to learn more. Now, on to the first way to differentiate actual clairvoyance with your loved ones from your own imagination. The first way to differentiate clairvoyance from your imagination is that actual visual imagery from spirit will be seemingly out of nowhere and often completely out of context from your own thoughts, whereas your imagination will not be. You are imagining things. What you are imagining is sparked by something you are already seeing, already hearing, already experiencing, or already thinking about in that moment. In that moment being the key. For example, if you are in your car driving to work and you are thinking about your dad who is in spirit, your dad who is in heaven, and you are thinking about how much you miss him, you are thinking about a memory of him, or you are maybe even crying a little bit about how much you miss him, and an image of your dad pops into your mind in that moment, that is likely not visual spirit communication. That is likely not clairvoyance. That is likely your own imagination. May that be spirit communication from your dad? Possibly. However, if you're new to this, especially, I would lean more into that being from your imagination as being sparked by your thought patterns on your stream of consciousness, because one thought led to another, led to another, led to another, and therefore created that thought imagery, i.e. your imagination in that moment. That is far less likely to have been actual spirit communication than to have been spirit communication. On the flip side, if you're in your car driving to work and you're thinking all about how you need to buy your son new soccer cleats before the weekend, or you're thinking about how you really want to make lasagna for supper that night, or some other totally random subject matter, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, your dad's image pops into your head, that is very likely clairvoyance from your father in spirit. That is very likely spirit imagery from your dad in heaven. That is a great example of how clairvoyance works. Spirit communication is very often out of context in comparison to imagination that is not out of context. Spirit communication will pop in as an outsider, so to speak, as an outsider from our own stream of human consciousness. That is a good denotation that such an image would be from your dad, that such an image would be from spirit and not your imagination. I do want to emphasize that you could have been thinking about your dad an hour before this. Your stream of consciousness in the moment is what matters here. Because if you were thinking about the soccer cleats or thinking about the lasagna, your dad popping in to that stream of consciousness is what matters. But your dad would have known that you would have been thinking about him an hour prior to that. It would still be out of context in the moment. And being out of context in the moment is what you want to pay attention for, or pay attention to when comparing clairvoyance to your imagination. So it's always about being out of context in the moment, popping in the moment. Your dad would also know that you were missing him earlier that day, which is why he would be wanting to make himself known now. The next way to tell the difference between clairvoyance or images from spirit and human imaginations is that the images from spirit will often be super fast and quite brief. They will often not be concurrent images. They will often not be one image after another, and they will often not be like movies. And this is mostly in the case of working with your own loved ones or being new to this rather than with developed psychic mediums. Sometimes with developed psychic mediums, we will have many concurrent images or movie-like reels, as I like to call them. But in the case of working with your own loved ones, or even a psychic medium working with our own loved ones, spirit images will come in and go out again. Versus your imagination will typically not be like that. Imagination is not like that because when we imagine things, we're often role-playing in our head. We're often playing out entire scenarios in our head. For example, you might be sitting in your living room, or you could really be anywhere, I suppose, and you might see in your head your husband in spirit sitting on the couch and you sitting on the couch next to him, and he puts his arm around you, and then he is looking at the TV and watching something with you, and he throws his head back in laughter, and then maybe he makes a joke about what you're watching together, and then maybe your living son walks by and he says hi to him, and so on and so forth. So that's usually how imagination works. When we are imagining things, we're typically not imagining a single image of an object or a single image of just a place, or a single flash in and a flash out of something. We are usually imagining scenarios. We are usually imagining interactions that are more than just a single hug or a single handshake or a single look. We are usually imagining interactions that play on, or we're imagining entire conversations, or we're imagining more than something that is in and out, like spirit communication would be. A spirit communication image which I would trust would be you are sitting in your living room at night watching TV. Your couch is to the right of you, and you are busy either watching your show, maybe you're scrolling Instagram while you're watching TV, because we all do that, or maybe it's just me, and you're paying attention to one or both of those things, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, while you're not thinking of your husband, a very quick, into your peripheral flash of your husband in spirit sitting on your couch in your living room flashes into your head and then flashes out. That would be an example of actual spirit communication. In such an example, your husband in spirit would be trying to tell you, hey, I'm here watching TV with you. So it's just like the first example, which was imagination rather than spirit communication. But in the first example, you would have been imagining all those things that your husband is there with you, watching TV in the living room with you. But in this example, it fits the criteria. It's out of context and it's coming in super, super fast, and you're not thinking about him to begin with. But they can come in showing themselves in the environment with you, and they can come in, sitting on the couch with you or sitting on the chair next to you, and that can be very valid spirit communication. But again, this example would be out of context, and this example would be very, very quick. But do you see the difference here of how playing a scenario out as a string is more imagination based versus this is more spirit communication based? Because it would come into your consciousness not as a portion of your already existing stream of consciousness, but more as an outsider to it, and it is very quick. The next way to tell the difference between clairvoyance from loved ones on the other side and your imagination is that imagery from spirit can often be too strange or weird for you to have actually made it up. And this is kind of a funny one, and metaphors apply here too. This actually happens a lot. It happens a lot in professional psychic mediumship, but it definitely pertains to connecting to your own loved ones in spirit as well. This is something else that I cover in Limitless, which again is linked below. But this happens a lot during meditation with connection to our own loved ones. Things are not always going to be literal. Now, this does not always need to be present. So if this criteria is not present, it doesn't mean that you're not experiencing actual spirit communication. What I'm saying here is that this can be present. What I'm saying here is that sometimes you will receive information that seems weird or super unique or strange, and you can't make sense of it, and so you think that it's your imagination, or you think you made it up, and therefore you dismiss it. And what I'm saying is that you shouldn't be dismissing it, because it is spirit communication, because it is weird and unique and strange. You are going to receive information from spirit that seems like it doesn't make any sense at all, but it actually does. A good example of this is one time I was in meditation and my maternal grandpa popped in. He popped in and I saw an image of him, and then he presented me with a Cracker Jack box. And interestingly enough, I had totally forgotten that Cracker Jacks had actually ever existed. Have you ever had something that for whatever reason your human mind totally wiped off the face of the earth? Like you totally erased the memory of its existence. So it could have happened to you with an object or a memory or a scenario where when presented with it, you were like, oh my goodness, I totally forgot those ever existed. Well, those were Cracker Jack boxes for me for some reason. And he must have known that, because when he presented it to me at first, I thought it was odd. And then when I came out of meditation later, I realized he used to give those to me or buy those for me all the time when I was a kid. And that was a very intelligent move on his part to present those with me, because not only was it not just some standard run-of-the-mill piece of information he could have given me, but it really brought back so many memories that came rushing in that I totally wiped out for some reason. So sometimes in such scenarios, it might take you a couple of days for such memories to even come rushing back. But if I had just automatically dismissed the Cracker Jack box, like, what is this? This doesn't make any sense. I would not have received the emotion from it or the messaging from it that I otherwise would have received. And this can happen in so many different scenarios. So many different scenarios really falls into metaphors quite a lot, which is something that I really want students in Limitless to go into quite heavily when they're in their meditations. And the reason that Spirit uses metaphors so often is because it's their way of going deeper with us. It's their way of getting into complicated scenarios without needing to use complicated communication, without needing to use words, feelings, and images all over the top of each other if they don't need to. And it's their way of showcasing their intelligence as well. Metaphors can be really strange too. So you may see something that seems really weird right after you see an image of your dad in spirit, and you may want to totally dismiss it, but something tells you to write it down, or something tells you to make a mental note of it. And then 2 days later, 3 days later, it makes so much sense. It becomes so clear. Metaphors are used all the time in professional mediumship because Spirit needs to get us more robust information, but they're totally used from your own loved ones as well. And dismissing information that seems strange or unique or more complicated as your own imagination is a huge mistake, because it's actually a sign of the opposite for this reason. And the reason I also say that is because they're not imagination, because they really don't have a place in your active thought stream of consciousness, which tells us 2 things. It tells us they're either from spirit, a loved one in heaven, or they're from your higher self, which would mean that they're your intuition, especially if they're randomly occurring. So don't dismiss strangeness as imagination, especially if it meets the criteria I just listed. The next way you can tell clairvoyance or spirit communication from your imagination is the spot in your head space where it comes in, and what it actually looks like when it comes in. And when I say this, I mean what it looks like and where it comes in your head space in comparison to your own thought imagery. I'm also referring here to literally where in your skull you are receiving the images. Now, I won't say that this refers to 100% of people, but it refers to the majority of them. And this is something that you can actually test out. The way that you can test this out is you can purposefully and consciously think of objects, think of places, think of memories. So for example, you could consciously think of an apple or a bicycle or a tree, and you can practice where do your conscious human thoughts reside in your skull space. What do they look like? Are they very colorful, very vibrant? Do they have thick edges, thin edges, no edges? But the key should be spatially, where are they? For me, individually, my human thought imagery tends to be here in the front and center, and my spirit imagery tends to come in on the right, kind of the top corner here. Everybody will be different. It is most common for spirit imagery to come in on the right, is what I've observed in other people. This is not to say that you should have that expectation for yourself. I'm just saying it's the most common. Now, once you have observed where your thought imagery is and what it looks like, then once you start practicing or being more observant and mindful with spirit communication and trusting yourself through the tips I've listed out in this video and in my other video, which I will pop up here on the screen, then you can make observations about what you are feeling and trusting as spirit communication from your loved ones, and you can compare the two. And the majority of people will notice a difference between what their own thoughts look like, which would also be imagination, because your thoughts and your imagination are one and the same, and what spirit communication looks like. You will most likely, the majority of people will notice a difference in the headspace location and how they appear. I've given you 4 ways to tell the difference between visual spirit communication and imagination, but remember, imagination is also not the bad guy. If you fear imagination, you will never allow yourself to let go enough to receive spirit communication. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to comment them below, and of course, subscribe for more. If you yourself are ready to enter into a journey of working on connecting with your own loved ones in spirit, go ahead and click the description box. There's a link in there for my workshop Limitless, a soul workshop for spirit awareness. That is where I teach you how to learn to connect to your own loved ones through meditation. Until next time, much love. Bye.